Hello and welcome to my talk about how the power motive, or the need to empower or overpower other players, can influence preferences in digital games. Before I move on to specifics of the game environment, League of Legends, and our 4 studies, let me give you a brief introduction to motive disposition theory. When we use the term motive, we are describing a disposition to achieve a desired end state that depends on individual preferences, and as a result, our motives are assumed to influence our behavior by orienting, selecting, and energizing it. David McClelland, the founder of the theory, differentiated 3 motives, which are affiliation, achievement, and power. Both affiliation and power can be described as social motives. A high affiliation motive should lead to the preference for mutually satisfying relationships on the same level, and can be classified as an experience-oriented motive. Power, on the other hand, is an effect-oriented motive and a preference for vertical relationships, where one person, usually the power-motivated individual, wants to have some form of power over the other person. In other words, they wish to have an impact or influence on others. The power motive can be distinguished into multiple facets, and there are a large number of terms and concepts associated with the idea of power, such as leadership, tyranny, guidance, or status. We follow a distinction of power into 2 facets: prosocial power and dominant power. Prosocial individuals wish to help and guide others, while dominant individuals seek to overpower others. Because these concepts can seem quite different from one another, here's what they have in common and why they might be sharing the same underlying motivation. The idea behind it is that power-motivated individuals wish to have an impact on other people, for example, to impress them and then being recognized as strong and superior, or by becoming well-known. After all, we are talking about the game League of Legends and not about a league of nobodies. Now, strength and recognition can come from different sources. Here we see 2 League of Legends champions who seem to adore each other. Jinx, on the left side, likes to destroy things by, for example, blowing them up, and therefore Yuumi might be looking at her with affection because she thinks that she is so strong. On the other hand, Yuumi is a healing and protecting champion who takes care of others, and therefore she might be recognized as being admirably helpful. Our explicit motives describe who we believe to be, which is shaped by our values and influenced by who we want to be. As an example, when a person believes to be strong, it is not unlikely that this is connected to seeing strength as a desired trait. For many personality traits, social desirability is a confounding variable, but for explicit motives, it is also part of the construct description. It is not as much of a problem that explicit motives are influenced by social desirability, because different people might describe different traits as desirable. The League of Legends champion Ashe describes this phenomenon well when she warns others to not confuse mercy for weakness, showing how even being good can be seen as a bad thing depending on the individual. Ashe is just one example for a champion which stands for an ideal and has been designed to express a certain personality. We could say the same about many different League of Legends champions, which repeatedly tell us who they are and what that says about their values. The players might certainly pick up on these personalities through those quotes, and it might influence them when choosing the champion that represents them in-game. We also want to stress that there is a difference between an underlying motivation and the result. Simply because someone wants to help others does not mean they are going to achieve this. The champion Jarvan is a good example, as he has an ability to lock in other players, which is great when he traps the enemy team, but sometimes quite unhelpful when he traps his own teammates. One question that might come up is whether a dominant power motive makes someone a bad person. Overpowering the enemy is the main goal of playing a MOBA like League of Legends, and therefore there's nothing inherently wrong with it. Being powerful in a game can be characterized as socially desirable, while the same is probably not true for negative behavior. I will now walk you through the game environment that we have chosen as the subject of our research. League of Legends is a popular multiplayer online battle arena game with a number of game modes. We mainly focus on the Summoner's Rift, where 2 teams of 5 players each fight each other in battles of 15 to 50 minutes. Players are assigned to a team, and the goal is to destroy the enemy team's nexus. In this case, the red team wants to destroy the blue team's nexus, and the other way around. When the blue nexus is destroyed, the red team won the match. For each of these matches, players take on a role. Both teams usually have one top laner, one jungler, one mid laner, one bot laner, and a support each. In the beginning of the game, each team owns half of the map. They start from their own base, where the nexus is located, and then try to win ground to move forward to reach the enemy nexus. They follow different paths depending on their role, which leads to multiple smaller fight locations. The top laners and the mid laners end up in 1-versus-1 battles, fighting their direct opponent, while bot lane and support usually fight together in a 2-versus-2 situation. The two junglers start out in neutral locations, but then can move around to, for example, help their teammates on the different fronts. As the game keeps going, one team is likely to win ground and push the other team back into a defensive position, eventually resulting in one team making it into the other team's base and aiming to destroy the nexus. In each of the 5 roles, players can choose from currently 148 champions, which can be classified as belonging to different types. Tanks are robust champions that often represent the front line in battles and protect their less robust teammates by intercepting enemy attacks. Fighters can do the same, but they are slightly less robust and also possess strong attack abilities, making them capable 1-versus-1 champions. Assassins or slayers are not robust, but usually very mobile. They attack their targets quickly and effectively, and then try to leave the fight before they can be taken out themselves. Mages are vulnerable to enemy attacks, but they often have strong ranged arcane abilities, allowing them to attack safely when hiding behind a sturdy frontline. The same is true for marksmen, except that their attacks are less magical and allow for a more consistent damage output by using, for example, guns or bows. Support or controller champions are protective mages. They are where we expected the power motive to matter in role choices. They often come with abilities that can empower their teammates, such as boosting their attack skills, and often they can shield or heal other players. This is why playing support champions allows for a strong pro-social impact on other players. In the past, the power motive has been shown to be connected to choosing helping professions in life. Supports could be seen as a game equivalent of this phenomenon. This led us to 3 broad research questions, which we explore throughout 4 studies, being whether the explicit power motive is associated to stronger preferences for the support role or other roles, and whether facets of power like prosociality and dominance predict different preferences. We explore these research questions throughout 4 studies, starting with the general power motive and role preferences, then developing a questionnaire to measure different power facets, and using it to predict support preferences as well as champion-type preferences in Study 3 and 4. For Study 1, we recruited 175 frequent League of Legends players for an exploratory online survey, measuring their explicit motives and also asking them about their preferred roles while playing the game. We found that none of the 5 roles showed a correlation with the power motive. This includes the support role that we had assumed to be connected to power motivation. This led us to the question as to why we did not find what we theoretically assumed we would, and we identified 3 possible explanations. As we measured the general power motive with mixed items, assessing both pro-social and dominant tendencies together, we might have mixed up the power strategies in a moment in which they make a difference. The second explanation was that the type of support that is preferred by the player matters. Maybe the power motive is only connected to tank or healing supports, but not to damage supports. The third possibility was that there simply is no relationship between the power motive and role preferences. In order to understand the relationship better, we first created a 6-item scale to measure pro-social and dominant power motivation in games. We chose the 3 best items after a series of smaller studies and tested them in a sample of 386 gamers. An example item for the pro-social power motive in games is, I am eager to provide emotional support for other players. An example for measuring the dominance facet is, I am willing to use aggressive tactics in a game to get my way. We extracted 2 factors in a factor analysis, matching our theoretical model. All items loaded highly and uniquely on their intended factors. But we also see that the 2 power motive facets are strategies that can and often do overlap. Few people score high in prosociality but low in dominance, while for a number of people it is the other way around. A large number of players score high in both facets. The sample here was not limited to League of Legends players. Since we assessed game-related motives, they might differ from motivations in other environments. Someone might be pro-social in the physical world, but play games as a healthy and socially accepted outlet for their more dominant tendencies. In Study 3, we use our newly created items to understand if and how they relate to role preferences and the support subtype preferences. Study 3 was very similar to Study 1, except for the new additions of power facets and asking players about their specific support preferences. We recruited 133 frequent League of Legends players. Multiple regressions show that prosociality and dominance predict a significant amount of variance for the preference to play top lane. According to our results, top laners are less likely to report prosocial motivations and more likely to report having a dominant power motive. There was no significant interaction effect. The dominance facet negatively predicted its preference for the support role, meaning that support role players were not more prosocial than others, they just had less of a need to dominate their enemies. While this was not what we expected, it is also not particularly surprising that support players had less of an interest to dominate, as in the game they tend to use their resources to empower others, not themselves. Top lane, on the other hand, is a 1v1 role, where one player often overpowers the other player, and it is one of the least likely roles to move around and help their teammates in early stages of the game. We found no correlations between the power motive and the three other roles. We have also been looking at 3 subtypes of supports, which describe 3 different playstyles for it. The first being the tank support, featuring champions that intercept enemy abilities in order to protect their carries. The second being the damage support, which we characterized as a type of support that mainly weakens the enemy players in order to make them vulnerable to one's teammates. The third type, which we identified, was what we labeled the classic support, including champions with empowering abilities who protect their teammates, often by healing or shielding them. Our results showed that classic support was the only subtype that was significantly associated with the prosocial power motive. However, both facets, meaning dominance and prosociality, did not predict a significant amount of variance together. So our findings indicate that the subtype does seem to matter. To summarize, we evaluated our 3 possible explanations from the results of Study 1, and we concluded that both power facets and the playstyle within a specific role seem to matter, leaving the open question if the champion type, for example tank or mage, is also associated with the power motive independently from a specific role. We explored this in Study 4, looking at the 6 champion types which I introduced earlier. We recruited 108 frequent League of Legends players, and we found that the 2 power facets were connected to multiple champion types. Players who reported an enjoyment for tank champions had both a higher prosocial power motive and a lower dominant power motive. Controller players reported a higher prosocial motivation, but there was no significant negative relationship with the dominance facet. Both slayers and fighters were not correlated with prosociality, but strongly associated with the dominant power motive. To summarize, we found no significant predictors of mages and marksmen, but we found tank players to have higher prosocial motivations and lower dominance motivation. Fighter and slayer players had reported stronger dominance motivation, and controller players reported a higher prosocial power motive. The details for the theoretical background, as well as our method, results, and discussion, can be found in our written paper, and we invite you to read it if you want to know more. I would like to use the rest of my time to share a few of our thoughts and an outlook on possible future work with you. Coming back to one of our earlier questions, it is certainly interesting to see that players of those champion types that we find to be connected to dominance motivation have been found to show more negative behavior in past surveys and studies. This does not prove any causal relationship and is still not what we measured here, but it would certainly be an interesting future project to connect these constructs and explore how exactly they might be related. Conversely, we might ask whether all tanks or controllers are friendly human beings, and there has been a study in the past suggesting that there might be some truth to this as well. However, this does not absolve every tank or controller playing from negativity, and we do have to remember that there might still be a difference between wanting to help others and being perceived by others as actually being helpful. We argue that there are a number of possible future research directions to take from here in order to understand mechanisms of individual differences in motivation better, including to integrate them with other theories and constructs. We conclude that the power motive describes the need to have a strong impact on others, that it can be used to predict playstyle preferences, and that in general motives are drives that can be used to explain inter-individual differences and motivation. Thank you for watching this talk, and please send me an email if you have any further questions.